somehow manipulate a psychiatrist to allow me to have an abortion, or any other woman in this state. It's very insulting. We're equal citizens. So I think we need to just stop bringing that up. That is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's very insulting. Is there any follow-up for aftercare? I have a European Journal of Medical Practice, a quote from them here, saying that when they came back from the UK, many women do not attend for aftercare and with their Irish GP, and it's because they're ashamed and embarrassed. It's because of the stigma that surrounds this issue, and often they present far too late with infection and bleeding. Now, I'm not a medical practitioner, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a lawyer, I don't pretend to be any of those things, but this does have to be dealt with, and I'm sure there are procedures that can be put in place to deal with that. We're just highlighting the plight of these women and trying to voice their opinions. Then on to the repeal. This is more so that a woman isn't dragged through the courts if she is initially, if her initial termination or initial request for termination has been turned down. This is to ensure that it's a medical board or a medical group that deals with this initially, and then if that fails, then she can go to the courts. But that initially, because it's a time-sensitive matter, that she could have a repeal through probably the hospital she's in or whatever medical board. I mean, I'm not a doctor again. The qualification of the practitioners, this is more so that it's not just consultants who can sign off on this. I mean, maybe we got this wrong, I'm not sure. I don't know the ins and outs of the registered practitioners, but this is specific to cardiologists, maybe if it's a cardiology thing. But I think the Master of Maternity Hospital did try and deal with that. But just to make sure that if someone has gone through the training but doesn't have a consultant post necessarily, and they're working within the hospital, that they would be able to sign off if there was not another consultant available. But you know, maybe I'm being naive in that. Then support for legislation and regulation. Yes, we do support legislation and regulation. The expert group report. I think that's definitely the best way to go following the expert group report. Fatal fetal abnormalities. I'm not a lawyer. I can't answer that question. Under our constitution, it does give an equal right to life to a fetus as it does to a woman. So if the fetus has not died in the womb, I mean, that to me says that we can't deal with fatal fetal abnormalities with the way things are at the moment, that we will have to move it along and have another referendum to deal with that. The statistics from the UK, I mean, I honestly have no idea where they got that from. And yes, the Irish Medicines Board, this just shows that we really need to deal with this issue. Women in Ireland are not being treated with the dignity and respect that they need to be treated with. They should not be self-medicating. This needs to be regulated. These pills need to be regulated that they're ordering online. This is putting them at risk, and we need to do something about it. We need the only way to reduce abortions in this country, because they are happening. Most of them are happening in the UK. The only way is to bring in fully comprehensive sex education, free access to contraception, a good, strong social system, and we need to start looking forward and saying, we can't criminalise women for this. That is not the way forward. If you think you're saving lives by doing that, you're not. The only effective way to reduce abortions is to do what I've just said. It's not to criminalise women or physicians. We need to regulate this, and we need to do it immediately. Now, I know that can't be done without a referendum, but let's ask the people. Thank you.
Ms. O'Connor?
Thank you. I suppose just first of all, in terms of Deputy Keller's questions, I suppose that was the point really I was trying to make at the end in terms of the legislation being limited, and we, you know, we're talking here about the X case. We're talking about where there is a risk to the life of the woman, and absolutely, that is a small number of cases. And you know, in our view, it won't help the vast majority of women who are travelling to the UK. So we absolutely recognise that, and that's why we think that while this legislation is urgent, it has to be done now. But we need to lift our heads out of the sand in terms of abortion in Ireland. I think, you know, a lot of the discussion around suicide and the concern of suicide, I think the first thing, and I know probably Alva really has sort of said it very well in her piece, is that that is what the X case was about. So in some ways, there is no choice here about whether it's included or not. It has to be. It has to be done, because that is what the X case was about. And I think I'll go back to, well, maybe I'll just pick it up because it sort of links to the suicide issue, which was Deputy Healy's question about, you know, this issue about manipulation of doctors. And even since these hearings have started, but before that, in terms of the campaign that we had in the Women's Council and just the women who've contacted us, you know, one of the things that's come out really strongly is that women need to be trusted, and the medical profession need to be trusted in this. And from our perspective, and from the stories that women have said to us, you know, thinking about having an abortion and going and having an abortion is such a difficult decision. It's surrounded in difficulty and stigma, as is mental health. And I think, you know, so the notion that suddenly women are going to do this is in some ways appalling. And I think it is, I mean, I think it is correct to say it's insulting to women. So just in terms of the post-abortion care, I think that's something that has come up quite a bit with our members and also with women who have contacted us. And a huge problem around post-abortion care is, for so many women, they don't want to say they've had an abortion, and they're not telling, they're barely, you know, not telling their family, friends. They're often only telling maybe the person who's travelling with them. So accessing services is a real difficulty, and part of that is about removing the stigma. It's about the decriminalisation. We need to create a completely different environment around abortion so that women can go and seek help and can, you know, seek post-abortive care after, and even in terms of the services that are currently there. In terms of Deputy Quaylan's question around that financial, you know, services being financially accessible, this is a really important point, and it was raised as well by Nan Grover, the UN Special Rapporteur on Health, just how important that actually is, and that that the legislation and regulations that come from it, that the government need to then provide within our universal healthcare plans, within service plans within the HSE, that issue of, you know, economic hardship isn't I suppose a block factor. So it is important, and it needs to be thought about in terms of this. Going back to Deputy Healy, yes, so, you know, the National Women's Council, we absolutely agree with the recommendation of legislation and regulation. And just finally, in terms of Deputy Conway's question about, you know, women accessing medication, you know, over the internet, this is actually an issue raised as well by CEDAW. It's a really important one, and I think it goes back to that wider issue of fear and stigma about going to seek help, about going to seek information. You know, I said that, you know, some of our members have said to us just fear even in terms of seeking information about travelling, and that's a constant issue. So I think part of the reason that that's happening is because women don't feel comfortable about asking about travel or their own situation. I think I've answered them all there. If I haven't.
Thank you. And Ms. Smith.
Thank you. I'll respond to some of the questions because many have been very adequately dealt with by my colleagues. In relation, first of all, to legislation and the best way to ensure that there would be no backstreet abortions, or indeed that there would be sanctions taken against backstreet abortionists, so to speak. The best way to deal with this, of course, is to legislate for there to be safe abortions in this country. And fundamentally, and at the end of the day, that is the reasonable answer to the question that Deputy Kelleher, I think it was, put. And I think it's very important that we keep on making this point. We have been, to some extent, saved from the excesses of the problems of backstreet abortions by having the escape route to the UK for at least those women who have been able to afford it. But of course, we cannot and we should not, in all honesty and in all truth and in terms of our responsibilities as a society, continue to do this. This is a very shameful exercise that we are embarked on. So I would say, certainly in relation to legislation, we need to basically legislate for safe, legal abortion in this country. And we certainly must decriminalise the doctors who are in the situation that they have described to you in some detail over the past couple of days, and indeed those women who sadly could also find themselves criminalised. In relation to suicide, a very brief word on that again, which really, as Orla O'Connor has said, that is specified in the Supreme Court ruling in the case of X, and as Orla said, that is the whole nub, the whole centre, the whole heart of the ruling in the case of X. And I think it's very important to underline yet again that Supreme Court rulings cannot be overturned on the basis of a change in view, a change in attitude, a change of mind, or on the basis of a whim. And furthermore, Supreme Court rulings are not a la carte menus where legislators and people can choose this bit or the other and say, well, we don't like this, but we'll take that. A Supreme Court ruling is a Supreme Court ruling, and to my mind, unless we are prepared to put in question the whole structure of the making of law and indeed of order in this country, we need to respect and honour our Supreme Court rulings and, of course, the members of the Supreme Court who make those rulings. With regard to online medication, again, my answer would be very similar to that which I've made in relation to the legislative question. Safe, legal abortion is what enables, and good aftercare, good care services, properly supervised, is what enables women not to have recourse to these really quite perilous measures of seeking to self-medicate across the internet with no guarantee, no regulation, and very little recourse if there is, or very little obvious recourse if there is a difficulty or a problem. So, so many of the questions that come up, really, it's about seeking to, it's as if we're saying, well, look, given that we can't have legislation that would really address the needs of women and the problem that we're confronting, what can we do to get around it? What are the little dodges that we can have to get around these problems? The problem has been staring us in the face for 30 years, and I have some sympathy with the deputy who said that there are parameters to this committee, again, I think it was Deputy Kelleher, and that there has been some repetition. There has been repetition for the past 30 years. Every single decade, we have had a dramatic event or an incident or a problem or a case which has come up yet again, and each time we try to push it onto the carpet. For the first time, there is an opportunity in this country to be direct, honest, and to grasp this particular nettle, which happens to be the lives and the health and the well-being of women of childbearing age in this country, to grasp that nettle firmly and to say, we will do what requires to be done to meet those needs and to meet our obligations as a society which really cares about its citizens.
Ms. Kennedy, yeah. Thank you.
I'd just like to add in relation to legislation for the X case, that not only, as my colleague Alf Smith has outlined, not only do we have the 1992 Supreme Court ruling in the X case, that we've also had a referendum in 1992 and a further referendum in 2002. In both referenda, the electorate had the opportunity to exclude suicide as grounds for an abortion in Ireland, and in both cases they refused to do so. So not only do we have a Supreme Court ruling, we also have two referenda that actually support this ruling. What we've never actually had is an opportunity to vote for a more liberal abortion regime in Ireland, and opinion polls over the past 2 decades show that increasing numbers of people support a much more liberal abortion regime in Ireland. And just secondly, very briefly, about the question of backstreet abortion in Ireland, I think we are fortunate in some regard to at least have access for those women who can obtain the necessary finances to travel abroad to Britain and to other European countries, there is some access to abortion for those women, but we do not know how many women are unable to travel for all sorts of financial, family and other difficult reasons. What we do know is that in jurisdictions where abortion is illegal and where there are not other legal alternatives, women will resort to backstreet abortion. And what we've seen in the last number of years, it's already been outlined by my colleagues in Choice Ireland, that increasing numbers of women are accessing the internet in order to obtain abortion pills. Tightening up of laws and regulations is not really going to, I think, prevent desperate women seeking desperate solutions. The only way to be sure that you can avoid the horrific scenario of unsafe backstreet abortions is to legislate for free, safe and legal abortion. And that's why I think when we talk about this legislation, that we have to see this as just the first step in providing abortion rights for women, because I think there is a big danger that we simply have ex-case legislation and we can all sort of say, well, that's it, that's over for another decade, or until the next woman finds herself dragged through the Irish legal system. That this can only, this has to be understood as the bare minimum, as an emergency or temporary measure. But we need to go on and look at all of the other situations that our presentations have outlined here, and actually provide real care for Irish women.
Thank you. Senator Cullenbrook.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the guests here for their presentation. Am I interpreting correctly in what you're saying, that because of Article 40, Section 3, Subsection 3, that no matter what legislation is brought into place, there really won't be a huge change in current practice in Ireland? And maybe you might clarify that, because that was my interpretation of your presentation. The second issue is in relation to the issue of doctors. You're talking about opening up as regards it just wouldn't be people who are qualified consultants. Just clarification on that, are you also talking about opening it up to GPs? And the question is that if you open it up in hospitals to non-consultants, then that's leaving the hospitals wide open, because in relation to all procedures, they have to be signed off on by medical consultants. So I'm not too sure whether legislation can deal with that issue. And the third one that I want to raise is in relation to the changes that have occurred in Ireland over the last 10 years. Teenage pregnancies have decreased by 44% over the last 10 years. And the number travelling to the UK from the records that we can get access to would also indicate that there has been a substantial decrease in the number travelling to the UK for abortions. What further work do you think we can do to, in fact, try and further reduce those two figures over the next 10 years?
Thank you. Deputy Catchenburn.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks. There's a lot have been said, and some of the questions have already been covered, so I won't ask any questions. I'll just make a comment or two, if that's okay. I first of all want to thank you all for your clear presentation. You're very clear in what you had to say and how you put it across. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for your time. According to this book here, which is General Practitioner's book, it says here, a doctor does have the duty to provide care, support and follow-up services for women who've had an abortion in another country. And I think that's very clear. And it's sadly to think that a lot of women probably don't realise that and probably don't follow up when they come home, unfortunately, from England. I suppose so maybe we need to look at trying to link people in a little bit more if they make themselves available. I'm not here to consider open abortion in Ireland. That's not my job here today. My job here today is to listen to all of the different submissions which we have listened to over the last couple of days, and to find some balance in legislation that will help probably a few more people not to have to leave this country, maybe not in their hundreds, but maybe a few more. So that's something we have to think about. I think the key issue for me is certainly 58 and 59. I think it has to be looked at. I think we have to support doctors to make sure they don't have to keep looking over their shoulders, to make sure that what they're doing is legally right. I don't have much more to add, just to say, as a parent myself and having girls as well, I do believe that education in sexual practice not only begins in the school, but begins at home as well. And we have a duty as parents to guide our children in about sexual activity and to let them know the risks and the unrisks. I don't have much more to offer because some of the questions have been answered. Thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Robert Dowds.
Thank you, Catherine. Just one question in two parts. I mean, clearly, irrespective of what one's view is on the question of abortion, there are clearly very considerable numbers of women who feel that they have to take that particular choice. Could I ask, to what extent is there counselling available for women who want to go down that route before and after an abortion, and what's your general view about the whole question of counselling before a woman makes a decision in relation to this issue? Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy. Any other member offering from the members of the committee? Okay. Ms. Joy or Ms. Fay or Mr. Rooney, whichever. Ms. Fay, yeah, thank you.
Just to address the first question about whether there'll be much of a change in current practice, I think that we've seen that legislating for X will only bring about abortion in extremely narrow circumstances, and it will still be one of the most restrictive abortion regimes in the world. So in all likelihood, if a woman doesn't think that she can access abortion under these narrow circumstances, she will travel abroad to get an abortion. So I would still say it's fairly likely that you'd have the same number of women going abroad to seek abortions. So I don't see there being a very big change. In terms of clarifying around doctors on the register or not, our point basically was that a lot of people would have the expertise, but perhaps a consultancy post hasn't opened up in the hospital. So they would still have the relevant expertise, but it might not be on the register. And this might be a case, say, in terms of smaller hospitals where you might not have such a wide pool of experts. So it's just to try and make it as accessible as possible. So that's what our recommendation was. In terms of the numbers of teenage pregnancy decreasing and a decrease in the number of people travelling to seek an abortion, I think that's reflected in terms of more access to information, more access to contraception, more access to sex education. But I also think that we have to realise that the only real solution and the only real way to decrease people going for an abortion is access to free contraception, sex education and free, safe and legal abortion in this country. I think that really is the only solution. In terms of aftercare, I think we'd already discussed how many GPs said that women felt such a stigma because of the stigma of abortion in this country that they didn't come to the doctor in time or they didn't seek aftercare. So again, I think it's more around changing people's attitudes, changing the stigma that exists in this country towards abortion. And in terms of counselling support for people in a crisis pregnancy, I think it's vital that a woman should have all the support that she needs to make a decision that's right for her. And so any provisions to be put in place for additional care for a woman to make that decision would be welcomed.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I suppose the first question is that the issue of huge, would this legislation bring about change? And I think while we have said that of the over 4,000 women, who travel, and in terms of the number of abortions that actually take place in Ireland, the numbers might actually be small, but where one woman's life is at risk, this legislation is critical. And I think that's really important. And I think what's really important as well is the issue of the decriminalisation and the message that sends out. And we believe that would have a ripple effect as well in terms of opening up the discussion around abortion and making women feel more comfortable in having that discussion and also in seeking post-abortive care. So I suppose in some ways, while it may affect a small number, it's a really, really important legislation that's going to be introduced. I suppose really I'd be given a very similar answer to the question around the decrease in the number of women travelling in terms of availability of services. And I think it probably does link as well to the issue of counselling services, which we believe are really important. It's really important that as much services and supports are there to assist a woman make a decision that's right for her. And I think that's the critical issue. And part of that is also having changing the situation where there isn't the stigma that's currently attached to abortion in Ireland right now. Thank you.
And Ms. Smith? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in relation to possible changes in practice, I agree very much with Orla O'Connor. I do think that this legislation is obviously extremely important, and not least in that it will give some clarity and reassurance to medical practitioners, and for that reason alone I think it's absolutely crucial. But it's also sending a signal. It is a recognition that abortions can be carried out, should be carried out, are carried out in this country, and that women do need abortions. So that when we're looking at changes in Ireland over the past 10, 12 years or so, yes, it is true that the numbers have been, the numbers of women and girls going to Britain have been decreasing, and fortunately the number of teenage pregnancies are decreasing also. But I think that we have to bear in mind that abortion is probably always, for some time into the foreseeable future, insofar as one can foresee the future these days, it is going to be a need. It is going to be something which women will need to avail of. So we need to make provision for it. And of course, the best way that we can do this is, in the first instance, I think that we should maintain and develop our investment in health education and promotion in relation to sexuality, in relation to reproduction, and with respect to relationships. And I'm just thinking here that the investment which the health services made, for example, in seeking to combat the spread of AIDS in this country has really been very effective and successful. So that while it would be quite wrong to say that there is no longer any problem in this particular area, health promotion and health education, which has been undertaken both in educational settings, but also in communities, and particularly in the LGBT community, really has been very, very effective indeed. So we do have models for this kind of educational promotion, awareness process that can be drawn on, I think, very, very readily. But of course, it would require commitment of resources and a commitment to really addressing that problem, to seek to ensure that we reduce, as far as is humanly possible, the need for any woman to have an abortion. It does not, of course, totally can't resolve the problem, not least because of those cases which I mentioned very briefly in my presentation. That is, those cases where abortion of a wanted pregnancy is required or is desired for medical reasons. And I'm thinking of those very tragic situations of fetal abnormality, which will not be covered by the X-case legislation. So that is something that we really do need to address in this country as a matter of urgency. Which I think I'll pass on to my colleague.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Just address the question of counselling. I mean, I think certainly one of the barriers to access to post-abortion counselling would be the fact that it is criminalised in this country. So a lot of women, I think, are aware that if they travel abroad to have an abortion, or if they use the abortion pills, that they are in effect doing something that is criminalised in this country. And I think that adds to the certain fear and stigma that might, in effect, reduce the number of women who may seek post-abortion counselling. But not every woman needs post-abortion counselling. For some women, they're quite happy with the decision that they've made. It's the right decision, a valid decision for them, and they don't feel the need to access counselling. But of course, for women who do feel that need, and I think that's probably compounded by the fact that there is a huge social stigma in this country around abortion. I think those services need to be regulated, but also expanded. And I think the need for regulation is very clear when you look at the fact of counselling before women travel abroad, or let's say crisis pregnancy counselling. I mean, Choice Ireland have done excellent work on revealing some of the kind of so-called crisis pregnancy counselling services that in effect bully or attempt to shame women when they choose to have abortions. And there are some problems and sometimes some confusion over some counselling services will offer information on adoption and information on keeping the child, but will not in effect give information on abortion. And sometimes it's not actually clear what services are available. And some women have had very distressing situations in which they have found themselves when they've outlined that they wanted to have an abortion, and they found themselves bullied and attacked for that decision. So I think there needs to be a lot more regulation around these counselling services. But also the fact, I think there also needs to be an acknowledgement that for some women, abortion can actually be a very positive decision, and there isn't the need for counselling.
Thank you. Any other member offering? Okay, we have 30 minutes in the member section remaining. Okay, thank you. We'll move to non-members of the committee, beginning with Senator Healy-Ames.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and panel, you're very welcome. If I could turn to Choice Ireland first, I agree with you on a number of things that the backyard clinics are very dangerous for women, and that the pills that are not regulated, etc., that they should all be outlawed for sure. But what has struck me today, following 3 days of hearings, is the danger of making decisions about legislating for X on the grounds of suicide in the narrow medical context only. And that it is absolutely vital that we look at the woman holistically, in terms of not just medical, but plus their social context, their family context, their relationship context, including their emotional and mental health. Choice Ireland, would you agree with this? And are you happy that Ireland will continue to remain a restrictive abortion regime? To the National Women's Council of Ireland, to Miss Orla O'Connor, I think is the name, I guess I'm very disappointed, Orla, with some of the claims made on your website. You are a very high-profile organisation. First of all, you claim to be the voice of the women of Ireland. I would dispute that. Just an arbitrary check here, none of us are members here, amongst a few of my colleagues. Secondly, you claim that the recent high-profile death in Galway, which I will not name,
please.
Yeah, is proof as a need for legislation to give effect to X. You have absolutely no evidence for that. That's a very dangerous claim, and it's a claim that's putting panic into this debate unnecessarily. We must deal with this debate in a very logical and calm way, because this is about deciding our future from here on, and it's really promoting your own agenda. Now, I'd like you to address that. And my final point, Chairman, is that you did say that it's insulting, Orla, to women not to believe them. I have said earlier today one of the failings of these hearings, and there haven't been many, is that there's been no primary evidence here from women in crisis. But Orla, is it not more insulting to women to think that abortion will treat suicide, and more damaging to women that abortion will treat suicide, when now we know much better, and we have far more evidence on that and what is helpful since 1993. I look forward to your response.
Thank you. Senator Vanabachik.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the panel for their excellent presentations. And I suppose I should say first, Senator Healy-Ames didn't check with me, but certainly Labour Women, I think, is affiliated to the National Women's Council, and I've personally had many dealings with the National Women's Council, although I don't think individuals generally are members, it's the organisations which are affiliated to the National Women's Council, and I've found them to be very fairly representative groups. I've attended some of the meetings in the AGM, so I think that was an unfair criticism. Could I just thank the groups for expressing very clearly the needs of the women who travel every year for abortion. I think, as I do agree with Senator Healy-Ames, and indeed I made the point myself, that the voices of the women who travel have been absent from this debate, from these hearings, and it's not.
Can we avoid the interaction between members? We've had a very tolerant, respectful debate up to now, and I would not like it to descend into Hit 16 episode, so if you could just...
Thank you. We're not thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I like the Hill 16 reference. Thank
I
you.
like Hit 16 as well. I've been there many times, let me add, so...
I think, but I think in seriousness, it's a reality check that you've given us that, that however welcome and however overdue the legislation we're debating is, it clearly won't meet the needs of the vast majority of women who are travelling for abortion every year. I would also just agree with Alva Smith's point that the change in culture has already occurred. And indeed, this legislation, a point I made in the earlier session, introducing legislation for the X case will not change the culture because, of course, the legal position will remain the same. We're simply making accessible and effective a legal procedure that's already available in theory through the Constitution and the Supreme Court decision in the X case. But the political culture in terms of public opinion has clearly changed, as opinion polls show. Just two questions. First, in terms of criminalisation, I'm glad you point out that decriminalisation and repealing the 1861 Act provisions, the Offence Against the Person Act, sections 58 and 59, you've called for repeal of those on the basis that that will help to reduce the stigma for women as well as reducing the chilling effect for doctors. Would amendment be sufficient in your view, or is repeal enough? And finally, very quickly, fatal fetal abnormality. You'll be aware that independent legal experts in the ICCL yesterday suggested legislation on the X case could, within the terms of the Constitution, cover that. Would you be in agreement with that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Michael Mullins.
I want to join in the welcome to our witnesses here. It's been a very informative session. I have to support Senator Healy Eames in saying that it is deeply disturbing that a tragedy would be used to promote a particular... No,
sorry,
I'm not.
Please.
I'm not.
Okay, thank you.
I'd be very, very careful.
Please don't.
And I think it's unfortunate that dishonesty like that is being put on a website.
Avoid using words like that as well, please. The language we misuse, Senator Mullins, respect, and I mean this with the best will in the world. Temperate,
and I would say to Choice Ireland as well, that on your website, and I would urge you to have a look at it, that in your founding statement section, you categorise pro-life groups who are here today and who gave very respectful presentations to the committee as the anti-choice movement is primarily a religious one. It goes hand in hand with an anti-contraceptive, anti-sex education, and is homophobic. Now, I don't think, and I would ask you, why is it necessary that you would use such deeply offensive language to describe people who disagree with you?
Thank you. Thank you. And Senator Paul Bradford. Senator Bradford.
Thanks, Chairperson, and welcome to groups. My apology for missing the first part of the presentation, but I saw it on the website. I have a short number of questions and a very brief comment. Firstly, to the individual groups, I would be obliged if you would respond to my observation that the medical experts who presented here this week, to a man and to a woman, said that to the very best of their knowledge, there has been no death in this country due to a lack of medical intervention. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? My second question relates to the presentation made. I think it is Action on X, and you helpfully provided what you described as a timeline. And amongst that timeline is the 1997 case of Miss C. Do you accept and agree with Miss C herself that what was done unto her and the forced abortion which she had to endure has caused her life to be ruined, that she regrets it, and is that something we should reflect upon? It's here on your time frame, the 1997 Miss C case. I'm sure you're aware of her public statement. I'm sure you're aware of her interview on RTE Radio with Pat Kenny, so would you please comment on that? And finally, though it has been said already, in relation to Choice Ireland. And I have asked for a respectful debate, and I try to be respectful, and I try to listen to every shade of opinion. But your website does describe what you call the anti-choice movement as being hand in hand with an anti-contraceptive, anti-sex education and homophobic mentality. Could I just put on the record, Chairperson, I'm personally not anti-contraceptive. I'm not anti-sex education. I'm not homophobic. I resent and I'm insulted by that comment on your website, and I would ask you to withdraw that juvenile, pathetic, irrelevant section on your website. It doesn't add to the debate in any respect.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll bring in our witnesses to come back, and then there's 7 more members have asked to speak. So,
first of all, I'll cover that issue. I never brought that up in this debate. I mean, that's you that's being juvenile, to be quite frank.
Can we, can we, sorry, can we avoid, sorry, Senator, sorry, Mr. Rooney, could we, I'll chair the meeting, thank you. Would you resume your seat, please, Senator Barrett? Thank you. Could you withdraw the remark, please, and address your remarks to the Chair? Let's have a tolerant, respectful conclusion to our hearings, please. We've had a very positive 3 days, and it would be a shame for us to end in a manner.
It's been a very respectful debate.
It is a two-way. I accept that, Senator.
And there's no need to bring our website into this. No need.
Okay, thank you.
Behind your website?
Sorry.
Why?
We've one chairperson here, senators and deputies. Thank you myself and.
Now I'll deal with the medical experts that say that yes, there has been no death due to the lack of medical interventions. I'm not a doctor. I don't have those statistics. I trust doctors in this country. And I'm sure that the women who otherwise would have died went to England. They deal with the women of Ireland compassionately, whereas we do not.
Thank you. Thank you.
The danger of the X case being too narrow, yes, it is too narrow, but it's what we're dealing with within our Constitution. Our Constitution does not allow for any broader terms to be brought in. The social and emotional context, I wasn't really sure what was meant by that. I think it was Senator Healy. I wasn't really sure what you meant by the social and emotional context of the X case.
No. Point of clarification, certainly. Sorry, my apologies. Yes, you may. No, please.
A young woman, any woman that gets pregnant, lives in a family, they're in a relationship, they may be under pressure to have an abortion. We've heard this evidence from other witnesses here today. And then the regret afterwards, having had that abortion, even though, and then end up feeling suicidal.
So to deal with that then, Choice Ireland does not ever say that anyone should be forced into having abortion. That is something that should never happen. That is a decision for that woman alone. That should never happen, but I'm sure it does. There are social and emotional problems surrounding this issue. That was not the case with the X case. That was not the case with the X case. She herself would prefer to take her own life than to carry on with that pregnancy. But our state would prefer to force her to carry her rapist's fetus to term, and she would prefer to take her own life. That is not what we were talking about today, not the social and emotional context in that context. This is not a method to treat suicide. She was suicidal because she was raped and became pregnant from it, and our country was going to force her to carry that fetus to term. That's why she was suicidal. This, indeed, Ivana, this will not meet the needs of most Irish women, but unfortunately we are constrained by our Constitution. I would love to have another debate about this, about broader legislative interpretation, or indeed a referendum. The decriminalisation of women and physicians does need to take place. We cannot criminalise women for this. They are going to the UK anyway. If you really want to criminalise women, why aren't you stopping them from going to the UK? Because you know this is going to happen. You know that women are going to go. And you know that deep down, that's the wrong thing to do. Women should be able to make that decision. The using a case as a tragedy, I mean...
Make reference to any cases that...
I'm not making any reference, but we're not using any cases as a tragedy. All of these cases are tragedies. All of them. And the X case in particular. And we need to deal with that right now.
And the C case?
Okay, Mrs. O'Connor.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions. Just to start with Senator Healy-Ames's questions. I suppose the first thing maybe to say, and I said this at the start of my presentation, is that, you know, I come here from the National Women's Council. There are 160 member organisations who represent thousands of women, and in fact, as Senator Bacik has said, and actually others in the room, because are part of the Women's Council in terms of the women's groups of political parties who are members of the National Women's Council. So And I think that's what I started off to say, and I suppose because I think it's really important that abortion and this issue has been discussed for over 30 years in the National Women's Council. And there has been motions brought that really do reflect the different perspectives and the difficult experiences around abortion. So, you know, I feel very strong coming here today in terms of talking about this, that there is a very strong mandate from women and from women's organisations. And I think it is backed up by the opinion polls as well. So I think that's important to say. And I think just in terms, because I grouped them, because that, you know, the issue of suicide came back up, and, you know, my key response to that, and, you know, I think myself, I think Alva has also said it as well in terms of Action on X, is, you know, that was the X case. And, you know, in what other area of policy do we decide to ditch Supreme Court rulings because we don't like them? You know, that's what that was about, and it allowed for suicide. And you, as legislators, have to go forward with that. Yeah, and I suppose I would also say that in terms of some of the other questions, which also related to suicide but wider, you know, there has been very clear testimony from the medical professionals at these hearings about very similar to the things that we've been saying about why it's important to decriminalise and why it's important to include suicide, and we would concur with those.
Ms. Smith, thank you.
Just in relation to the point about culture, just my point, you know, was Choice Ireland happy that Ireland would remain a restrictive abortion regime? Well, it isn't, and neither is the National Women's Council, and neither is Action on X. But neither, perhaps more tellingly, are 82% of those questioned in the recent Red C poll. 82% of voters supported a constitutional amendment to extend the right to abortion to all cases where the health of the mother is seriously threatened, and also in cases of rape. So I would come back to the point which was made by my colleague Sinead Kennedy a little while ago, which is that, you know, we have never really had an opportunity since 1983 to answer a direct question about having more progressive abortion legislation in this country through a referendum. And increasingly, I'm of the view, I don't like referendums any more than anybody else here does, perhaps, but they are very useful in democracies. In fact, they're very important in democracies. And furthermore, they help legislators to know what people are thinking in democracies. And I would have thought that given the amount of conflict, trouble, divisiveness, controversy, bad feeling, all kinds of things that we have had in relation to the issue of abortion over 30 years, that I remember every single one of those issues extremely well, as do other people in this chamber today. I think that it is about time that a sensible, practical question was put to the people of this country, and that we get a clear answer, at least for the next decade. In relation to the question raised, I think, by Senator Bacic, that really, and fatal fetal abnormalities, I'm thinking there, obviously, of the case of Dee versus Ireland, which went to the European Court of Human Rights. And while that case was deemed to be inadmissible in that court because not all the remedies had been exhausted in the courts in Ireland, at the same time, it was apparently agreed that the Irish government itself had argued in its defence there that it would have been possible to interpret Article 43.3 as permitting terminations in cases of fatal fetal abnormality. And the ECHR actually agreed with that point that was made by the Irish government. So there is an area there which is very important to the lives, perhaps of not very many women, but is absolutely crucially important to their lives, that does require exploring, and perhaps that might be one of the points raised by this committee in your report back to the legislature.
Thank you. We have a number of speakers. I'm going to take them all together, so if the members could be brief, please, because I'm extending this time for the non-members, because we didn't allocate all of them, but I want you to be brief, please. Deputy Terence Flanagan.
Just have a series of questions, thanks. Just to ask the National Women's Council, as a state-funded organisation that seeks to represent the views of all Irish women, do you feel any obligation to represent the views of many Irish women who are opposed to abortion? Also to ask, do you believe that the unborn has any rights You quote as well approvingly of the UN Special Rapporteur that restricting is an impermissible barrier to the realisation of women's right to health, which must be eliminated. Does this mean that you're opposed to all restrictions on abortion? Can I ask Choice Ireland, your founding documents state that you campaign for free and legal advice on demand. Does that include partial birth abortion? Can I ask Action on X? You say it is public knowledge that some of the Irish women who have an abortion in Britain do so because the pregnancies would damage their physical or mental health or possibly endanger or shorten their lives. I'm just wondering on what basis do you make them comments? Also, if a woman does decide to abort a baby, are there any situations where you believe that the father has any rights to oppose this? And in the same situations, do grandparents have any right to oppose the abortion of their grandchild? And just in conclusion, to all the groups, would you support the choice of a woman who wishes to abort her baby because the baby's gender poses a mental health threat to the mother? And would you support the choice of a woman as well who wishes to abort because the fetus has been diagnosed with a cleft palate?
Thank you, Deputy.
This poses a mental health threat to the mother.
Thank you. Deputy Marcella Cochrane-Kennedy.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentations. I just have two questions. One is, we've learned over the last couple of days that it has been estimated that 14 women a day are going to England for abortions. And I'm just wondering, do you have any research or any information on who the, not specifically who they are, but maybe the causes of why they're going, you know, what age they are, the demographics, any of that type of thing, because I think it's important that we get some indication as to why that is. And the other thing is, I've heard you refer to a safe legal abortion in Ireland. What do you mean by safe legal abortion? At what point do you feel that it is permitted to abort a fetus for whatever reason? And I think it's important for us to know that in the context of the X case, because if somebody's suicidal at a particular point, maybe the second trimester, what happens then? Would you agree with abortion, delivery, or what? Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Éanna Riordan.
Thanks, Chairperson, and again I'd like to welcome the groups who are here. Just to ask you, Dr. Simon Mills here yesterday gave us a draft bill that he felt maybe a workable document that we could work off in terms of legislation for the X case. Can I just ask you, it actually includes a section on fatal fetal abnormality. I know you may have touched on this before, but his suggestion was that it would be constitutional to have that provision within that bill. I don't know what your view on that is. He also included in it a section about conscientious objection, which I think was part of the original British abortion law in the 1960s. So I wonder if you have a view on that as well. And just in terms of bans, Chairman, because I did ask the previous group, the anti-abortion group, about lobbying, I think it's only fair to ask you as well what you consider to be appropriate or inappropriate lobbying of TDs and senators on this issue on an individual basis. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy. And Senator Jim Walsh.
Given the fact that the medics that came before us, the masters, and all the medics stated that there was no problem, in their opinion, in dealing with patients, no record of any inhibitions on them because of current legislation, would you please answer that question if you accept that from them? Secondly, can I ask, just in relation to your submissions to us, you seem to, I think, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, that abortion is a solution to all problems in a crisis pregnancy. Do you think that it's beyond the capacity of us as a society to be able to deal with this crisis situation other than where there's a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother from a medical condition, from a physical medical condition, that we can't actually deal with that in a way that could actually give supports, medical counselling and every other way to save the life of the mother and also to save her baby so that they can enjoy each other in future years? Can I just refer the lady, I think, with, is it X? Yeah, Action X, sorry.
Ms. Smith and Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah, to Dr. Bernard Nathanson's book, and I'm sure you know who Dr. Bernard Nathanson is. He was one of the great campaigners for abortion in the US. He wrote a book, Double Day, in 1979, and I'll just give you a couple of quotations from it. The smallest threat of suicide was the logical battering ram. It was just a question of finding a squad of complacent psychiatrists. Out would come the little notebook from my back pocket for a quick consultation to see which two I had sent the last woman to. And he went on to say one particular psychiatrist was prepared to conduct his interview in 5 minutes and to charge $100 a letter. To be fair, not all members of the psychiatric staff cooperated. Now, just one final thing. Could I correct something?
You've spoken longer than anybody else known this.
Somebody came back to me to say that this morning I gave some wrong information And lest I did, can I just say, 1 in 4 to 5 pregnancies in Britain, and he thought I said 4 to 5. Or 4 out of 5. 1 in 4 to 5 pregnancies, 1 out of every 4 and 5. In other words, 20 to 25% of pregnancies in Britain end in abortion. Do you think that's a good scenario for society?
Thank you. And Shannon Ronan Mullen.
Well, I certainly would like to thank our guests, to whom of course I disagree on many things, for at least using the phrase fatal fetal abnormality and not that terrible phrase that was being bandied around a number of months ago, incompatible with life. Yeah, I just wanted to make that a prefatory comment. I think other speakers have done it as well, Chairperson.
In our committee, so thank you.
Well, I've heard a lot of comments. Well, sorry, what hasn't been done?
Carry on.
Yeah, because I say that as somebody that, because the issue of fetal abnormality has been raised on numerous occasions, and I've had a lot of contact with families who are terrified at the prospect that the children that they loved till their natural end, and children who would henceforth be in a situation in a society where would not be regarded as deserving of protection and respect in society. So there's a very real debate to be had there, with great sensitivity but with respect for life. Many of those families frankly see that as part of a euthanasia debate for terminally ill preborn children. I would like to ask, because I suppose suicide...
Time is moving. Thank you.
May I ask the question? Yes. Just as suicide has been central to the debate, where on the one hand we appear to have heard from eminent perinatal and other psychiatrists who frankly haven't come across a case where they said abortion would be indicated by what they had encountered. In fact, it doesn't appear to be a medically indicating phenomenon. But on the other hand, we've heard from people who talk about the pressure on psychiatry. In the past, we've heard from people like, I think, Anne Furedy from a British abortion provider, who talked about how mental health in Britain was the ground on which people who did not have mental health challenges nonetheless obtained abortions. I would just like to ask you, what is your honest opinion if there is legislation for abortion on the X ground, which many of us fear it will open the gates, but which many of us just fear is unjust in principle anyway because it isn't a medical response? What do you think it will lead to in terms of, your best estimate, having heard the evidence, having looked at it, in terms of the number of abortions taking place on that ground in Ireland in the next couple of years?
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Martin Conway.
And as this morning's session, I was very critical of one of the witness groups in terms of their, I suppose, past behaviours. And in order for balance, and language is important, I too would like to put on the record that the language in certain websites of certain groups here is inappropriate and unfair. And what we need is a mature debate and discussion on this issue, because I think the vast majority of the people who are looking to us as parliamentarians for resolution, if you want to call it that, to this very serious problem, want common sense. And they want us to behave and to be common sense. Common sense about it. Yes, I'm coming to it.
Thank you.
I haven't spoken very much in the last 3 days.
I appreciate that.
So I'm coming to it. The one thing that does concern me is, the situation, if it's discovered that a child to be, if you like, has a disability, and a serious disability of some kind. Were the principles of X, if you like, to be followed through in legislation? How, and from your experience and from your knowledge of this area, how do you protect that? When a child or a child to be is discovered to have a disability, where's the protection in that regard, and that an abortion isn't carried out specifically because the person to be will be disabled?
Thank you, Senator. And finally, Deputy Bernard Duck.
Finally, again, Chairman. A similar question, it's always brief for me, I can assure you. Chairman, similar question to that I put to previous contributors. Is it accepted, in view of the fact that this is a particularly emotive subject and that there are very sincerely held views on both sides of this debate, is it accepted that, notwithstanding all of this, that the most appropriate way to address the issue is by way of legislation and or legislation and regulations, with a view to ensuring that in all circumstances where pregnant women have to be treated for one or other or whatever procedures, that they are treated in a manner which is consistent, and that there is no doubt left as to what they might be likely to expect, and that they can be reassured of attention and treatment in all cases equally, regardless of the views of the people or persons to whom they are referred.
Thank you. And may I just, in the sake of balance, also make the point that I made a comment this morning and I make the comment again. I think all groups need to review and moderate the campaigning behaviour they're engaging in terms of their content. I said this morning as well, so that's my own personal view as well. So, Ms. Rooney, if you want to, or Ms. Fay, whichever wants to go first. Yeah. Thank you.
Just in terms of Choice Ireland's stance, we campaign for free access to accurate information on crisis pregnancy. We campaign for comprehensive sex education, free access to contraception and free, safe and legal abortion. In terms of someone brought up abortion based on sex or gender selection, we say that that's rooted in patriarchal structures, and male preference is as a result of gender norms that value male over females. So any proposed bans on abortion for the purpose of sex selection wouldn't do anything to counteract the entrenched gender bias that underlies this practice. I think we've seen the experience in other cultures. It's demonstrated that such bans, they have been ineffective, and they've further exacerbated gender discrimination by undermining women's autonomy and creating additional obstacles to women's healthcare. In terms of someone asking for the demographics of the different types of women who are travelling for abortion to England, I don't have statistics,